Thank you for coming. So, as I was saying, what I want to do today is give you a quick overview of what we're trying to accomplish here. I do want to take a moment to sort of walk through the background as to how we got to where we are today, and then the plan going forward. So, as I was starting to say, this idea of identifying signature areas and emerging areas at the University of Maine came out of the Blue Sky Strategic Plan. If you go back and review in the Blue Sky Strategic Plan, you'll see that it primarily was focused on identifying what are our signature areas of research and what are the areas of emerging excellence in research. And the thinking was that, or the language was that we would do that, we would review our areas so that we can give priority for funding so that we're preserving the things that we're known for, the things that are our signature areas, and that we can also invest wisely in areas that are emerging and have the potential to reach a national and international significance for the University of Maine. So that's where this endeavor began. Last year there was a lot of conversation in around the campus about this. The Faculty Senate took some time, and I think particularly the executive committee of the Faculty Senate. And I think what they did, the way Harlan explained it to me, was they looked at the Blue Sky Plan, and the Senate executive sent forward a series of memos to each of the pathways with suggestions about various aspects of what each pathway was responsible for. So they sent a memo on January 23rd last year with some suggestions to aid and move things forward in Pathway 1. And I mention that because while actually that memo included a pretty detailed explanation of how, they recommended anyway, this proceed. I mentioned that because I think it was an important part of the conversation is that memo and discussions that followed about it and from it have influenced the way this process has unfolded, and I'll highlight ways in a minute. The other next sort of step, I guess, was Pathway 1. A subgroup of Pathway 1 spent some time focusing on this signature and emerging and interpreting it and coming up with some guides of how we might implement this action of identifying signature and emerging areas. And I lifted just some of the language of what came out of, boldly marked as draft, but a draft recommendation from Pathway 1 about how to proceed. And again, what I've chosen to highlight is that you can see what the focus of that set of recommendations were on things that are new, the things that are not so much where we're established, but things that are new and emerging. And they were very explicit in that language to talk about new money. That what they're looking for is this was a set of guidelines or recommendations for new money coming into the university and how new money might be used. And they even talked about what they meant by new money. So for an example, they gave, for example, an increase in MEIF funding, being an example of new money that came in and how it should be dispersed. And they even included some language about not cannibalizing, I think was the word they used, other programs. So this year, so this year, you got a new provost, and a lot of things get put on my desk, and one is, guess what, you're responsible for this. So let's think about how we want to implement it. So what I did was gather the information that had been produced so far and start to have discussions with people and think about how we want to go about do this. Well, one thing that came through very clearly from the recommendations that came out of the Faculty Senate and Pathway 1 was that they wanted some kind of process that was open, that had some kind of opportunity for people to express their ideas or make their plea or make their case why their area might be considered signature at the university. Another thing that emerged from the discussions, again, the Faculty Senate memo and discussions that came out of this, was that people started talking beyond just research areas to look at other aspects of the university and looking at how we would evaluate them, what we could consider signature that wasn't solely focused on research, but also in our educational mission. There was also, and again I credit the Faculty Senate for highlighting this, that we need to be mindful that the university can't advance if we only focus on those things that are established as excellent and those things that are new and exciting. But there are certain things that are foundational to any university, particularly if we're talking about the educational area, that are foundational for any quality education. And if we're going to continue to do that, provide our students with a well-rounded quality education, we can't ignore these foundational areas. And so there was a call for attention to that, and again, I thought that was important. The other piece, I guess I put it as a bullet point, but the other thing, of course, is that looking at what came out of Pathway 1, looking at the university's situation with respect to our budget, it's clear that significant amounts of new money are not going to be coming down, raining on the university. And in fact, we're maybe making very difficult decisions about how to use the resources that we currently have. And so, thinking about how this exercise of identifying areas that are signature and emerging can benefit the university is to think about, can we engage in a process as a campus to identify these areas, and that the end product would be, we've identified area X to be a signature area, and that would be one of the factors we consider as we move forward making the decisions that we make every year, such as how to handle a budget cut, what faculty lines to approve, what do we highlight in our fundraising effort, and how do we allocate our limited resources for private fundraising. How do we advance in our efforts to recruit students? We're making these kind of decisions all the time, and they're made for a whole variety of reasons. And I don't see Harlan here, but I don't think you mind if I quote him. And Harlan says that sometimes administrators make these as arbitrary and capricious decisions. And so this is an effort to be somewhat less arbitrary and capricious and more open, to say, as a campus, we've decided that this is an important area. And so as we're making decisions, we're going to consider that we feel that this is a signature, and to use that as an example, a signature area for the university. We want to make sure that it's adequately supported. Okay? So with that in mind, with those sort of ideas in mind, we set out in a process of inviting and figuring out how to have an open process here in public discourse about this. So many of you were there on December 3rd. We had an open forum. There were about 55 faculty who attended. I went through some of this background information. We summarized what was, or Harlan actually got up and summarized some of the points from the Faculty Senate's memo. And we had, I thought, a good interchange. There was a lot of good questions, a lot of challenging questions. There was good discussion about what this could mean, what this might look like for the University of Maine. So from there, we took that, and again, to try to keep the conversation going, we created a website, and on the website we posted the slides that we used. We posted, Robin wrote a summary of the notes of the discussion, and we put a film up. If you're, again, bored, there's a YouTube of the entire conversation so that people could see. And then we created a way for people to give further input, right? So you could write in further comments. So again, this was all in an effort to have this be an open discussion amongst our faculty and administrators about how to move this initiative forward. Be honest, we weren't overwhelmed with written input into our website, but we got about 3 or 4 people who wrote in, and another 3 or 4 people who didn't follow directions but wrote to me directly in an email, and that was fine. So we got some input that way. So the next step was to try to advance this was working with an advisory group. So I formed an advisory group of administrators and faculty to take what the assignment was to say. I said to them was, look, here's all this background material. Here's what came out of the Faculty Senate. Here's what came out of Pathway 1. Here's Robin's written summary of the discussion. Here's the video if you want to watch it. I'm not sure how many actually did, but I encourage them to. And then I said, well, what the task for this group is to help me figure out a couple of things. One is, what are the criteria we're going to use to evaluate proposals? We already decided, because there was, again, that seemed to be the consensus, that the campus was interested in an open process, that we would solicit proposals about what should be considered a signature and or emerging area. And so if we're going to get those proposals, what would be the criteria against which we evaluated the proposals? And the second task for the group was, I said, help me think through a process that is reasonable within time frame that would make this useful, and that invites invites a reasonable amount of interaction, but isn't overly burdensome. I said it in December when we met. One of the things I didn't want to do was to send faculty off to write lengthy proposals, occupying their time in ways that would not be constructive. So we thought about what could be an iterative process. And actually, so anyway, that all happened on January 10th. I took that advisory group that you saw. We went away for a day, or the better part of a day. We had two facilitators, folks from Cooperative Extension, who helped to keep us organized and the discussion flowing. We made the decision that it would be very difficult to come up with criteria that would be applicable both to research areas and areas of education. So we decided to separate that out and have two groups off thinking about these different ways and exchanging information, blah, blah. If you notice in the, I'm sorry, I meant to mention this. If you notice in the advisory group, it included faculty administrators. It also included one member of the public, Miles Thiemann, who's on the board of visitors and a good friend of the university. And I actually mentioned that because he brought a very, I think, useful perspective to the discussion. So coming out of that meeting, we drafted criteria. I sent it back to the group, feedback, some back and forth electronically. I shared it with the president, got some feedback there. I sent it to the Faculty Senate leadership for their comment. I received none, but I do want you to know I sent it to them. So let me jump to the timeline of what we're looking at. So what we did actually on that Monday, February 3rd, I sent out the RFP. Actually, the Friday before that, I sent a memo to every faculty member describing this process and what we wanted to try to accomplish. On February 3rd, we sent out the RFP that I assume you saw. We're meeting today, and again, the purpose of today's meeting is to have an open discussion where people can ask questions about. My anticipation would be about the process, but of course you can ask questions about anything you want. But you might ask questions about the intent of this program as well, and I'm happy to try to clarify that as best I can. We pushed back because of the snow day last week, and we canceled this forum the first time. We pushed back the deadline a little bit for concept papers back to February 28th, and the review team, and I'll show you the members of the review team in a second, were nice enough to say that's all right. We'll do it in the time you give us if we can get them roughly around the 28th. What I've got planned then is that we'll receive these 3-page concept papers. The review team will meet on March 17th. We'll set aside a block of time. You've seen the criteria. There is a rating that goes along with that. We're not looking at doing any kind of, I don't anticipate us doing we may do some numerical just to get a broad summary, but what we want is to have a discussion about these proposals, because two things I anticipate would come out of that discussion about, based on the concept papers. One is that we would be able to, well, maybe three things. Okay, one is that we would communicate back to some groups saying, hey, we think you're right on track, and we encourage you and would like you to submit a full proposal. The other might be to send to folks saying, I really don't think this is broad enough or matches the criteria that we've established. You haven't made a convincing case, and we love you anyway, but don't bother to do a final proposal. And the third thing that might come out of this is that we would say to one group, hey, you know what, you've presented something that's awfully similar to this group over here, and we're encouraging you all to get together and talk about this, and here's some guidelines of how you might think about putting together and submitting a different proposal or an integrated proposal. So we're going to have time to discuss these concept papers and hopefully look for that kind of integration. I said I would mention the review team. So the review team, it looks a lot like the advisory team, but it is different. Janet Waldron was on the advisory group. She's not on here. Jeff St. John was on the advisory group, and he's not going to be on the review team. There were some faculty changes. Alia Betty was added from engineering. I think where else? That might have been the only one that we added. And then Miles agreed to continue. Now I have external reviewer 1 and external reviewer 2. In what I sent out to you all a few weeks ago, I just had one external reviewer, and I thought I had the perfect person, and I still think I had the perfect person identified, except for the fact that they wouldn't do it. So I had talked with a person who I thought really could bring what my thinking was, and I say my, but this was discussed with the advisory group, is that if we could bring someone who had not a Maine-centric view, but a more national view about higher education and directions in higher education, that would be a different perspective to bring into our discussion about this. Since I didn't succeed with the first person, I've got a couple of invitations out right now. One is, actually they're both people from AAAS, but it's two different AAASs, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. There's someone I know there, and I haven't heard from them yet. So Dan Samwise actually said he knows someone else that I can contact. But anyway, we're going to look for someone there. And the other AAAS, which is about advancement of science, I think you probably all know the acronym, and I'm blocking on it. But I have an invitation from someone there. The two people that I've invited, their academic backgrounds, one's a physicist and one's a historian, but they also represent, again, they're involved with national organizations looking at higher education and research. So I'm hoping that we can succeed in getting at least one and hopefully a couple of voices that are not main focus, but can help bring a different perspective to our evaluation of these proposals. Okay, so that's where we stand right now. I could show you the criteria, but you know you've already seen them. So let me just open up and see if there are questions. Let me see what questions there are. You would be here for
I've heard different numbers tossed around. Of the, I guess now 4 areas, signature and emerging, research and teaching, how many awards are you talking total?
Okay, so I'm not going to use the word awards because no one's getting, you're not getting
not awards, priorities.
Or anything in this designation. And then the second thing I'm going to do is not answer your question directly because and that's on purpose, right? I would like to see what emerges, right? So I'll answer it, I'll not answer it, then I'll sort of suggest it. We'd like to see what emerges, right? I don't want to arbitrarily say, well, we have to have 3 in each, or 4 in each, or 5 in each. So we haven't, on purpose, we have not designated. Another variation of that question is, well, what's the minimum and what's the maximum? And I'm not going to say that either. My own impression might be that 3 or 4 in each area would be a reasonable number, maybe as many as 5. But I want to see what comes out of the proposals.
In the fall, it said that in 2017 they reviewed. I was just curious about what you see as the timeline after this decision is made. Merging areas go around all the time.
Yeah.
So will review mean there will be a possibility for new proposals, or what do you foresee?
My first facetious comment was, God only knows where I'll be in 2017. So, but my thinking is Yeah, we will evaluate this to say, well, you know, we would have had 3 years. Has this been a useful exercise for the campus? I'm going to go on the assumption that it will have been. And then, yeah, then what I would anticipate is some kind of another variation of something like to say in 2014, we as a campus identified this as emerging areas, and these are our signature areas. Where are we at in 2017? Maybe it would be, we could think of some way to bridge the process, since we would not be starting from scratch. And presumably some of the areas that we say are signature that, again, as our criteria indicate, they have a sense of stability, that they're not going to, hopefully not disappear by 2017. But I would imagine with the emerging areas, we would have some kind of process that would be analogous to this. Yeah, Lee.
So I'm looking closely at the criteria sheet, because I have a sense it's very important to kind of go point by point.
No question.
It's a and in the sort of emerging educational area, which is what I'm sort of interested in, there's never the mention of the word national or international. It talks about fit to place in Maine, Maine's existing resources, fostering community engagement. So I want to be clear that I can really emphasize Maine, and that would not compromise my proposal.
Yeah, no, you're right. Now, I think one of the criteria then has to do with the resources, like the quality of the faculty or something to that effect. Is that right? I can pull it up here. I think there might be, what I'm getting around to is that you're fine and you're right to interpret it that way. I think, again, when we look in these emerging education area, we would say, advances instructional reputation and recognition through achievements of the faculty, research, teaching, and service outreach. So in my take would be that a faculty who have national reputations in areas, that would be a factor in considering this. So I mean, I hope I've answered your question. It's not that the area has to be of national significance. The area could be local. Right? It would strengthen one's application if they could say there are resources, including faculty resources, that bring a recognized reputation.
Jeff?
Tom.
Could we imagine that there might be some programs that were both signature programs in terms of education and also in terms of research? And if you get those, are you considering in any way melding those two categories to be
Well,
direction?
so yeah, I don't think we'll meld the categories, although, again, you can tell this is a flexible process. Part of what you'll see in each of these criteria, or in each of the areas, is some version of demonstrates and sustains synergy of teaching and research and or service in an educational area. And the research areas demonstrates an integration of the teaching. So that is clearly, no matter what area we're looking at, one of our criteria that again, our the advisory group, and I think emerged from the discussions around campus, is that we're looking at things that are doing both, or doing all, if you will. But the reality is, you know, most of these areas will be predominantly known for or significant in one area with a good integration of the other.
Well, the reason I ask is it's frequently the case, say, in liberal arts, particularly humanities, and something that has an interest in the research direction will also have an interest in the education direction, separate.
Yeah,
So then it becomes a matter of emphasis, I think.
that's what I'm saying. It's more than a matter of emphasis.
I saw the word, or heard the word multidisciplinary somewhere. So, in the educational arena,
Go ahead.
the proposal would pull in examples, I guess, or evidence from 2 or more departments that are focusing on a particular concept, I
Yeah, okay, so that's a good question. Yes, is, I think would make a stronger case on that criteria. Again, working with the advisory group, what we're trying to do is think more broadly than the department level. And so, again, it's easier to teach by example, but if I start giving examples, people are going to say, oh, that's what he's thinking of, if you may, right? So I'm struggling a bit, but areas that we would say, are things that without an example, it's hard to do, but that cover that more than one area would contribute to. There might be one department that's clearly the lead in this, but other areas have expertise and be an area that we can say we are.
And so the concept paper is pulling together information that might be somewhat at the superficial level because of
Because you've only got
the limit, and then you can expand on that if you're like.
That's right. That's the idea. Mike?
You had said that you may point out to two different concept papers that, my goodness, you've got a nice complement going on here. Will that also have guidance of, people in this particular discipline did not put anything in that, but you might want to bring them in as well? I mean, is this something which, as it identifies paths forward, that it will sweep others into it, even if they were not initially?
That's a good question. I had not thought of it in that way, but I can't see a reason why we wouldn't want to do that. Again, what I anticipate is that we might give a little feedback saying, you know what, the way you've described this, it's interesting, but it's fairly narrow, and are you aware that there are people in these areas of campus that are doing this? And encourage, obviously we can't do any more than encourage or ask people to think about it.
The reason I ask this in part is, looking at the long arc, but also given the relatively short window, that's a fairly short window to send out feelers to other departments and really have faculty discuss in any depth from across 2 or 3 or 4 departments.
If it's a first conversation, you're right. I can elaborate on that. Again, what we're trying to do is, it's the idea that's emerging. We didn't say new ideas that no one's thought of at UMaine before, but we're going to grab.
No,
We're not in a position there. So,
No, I understand that, but I mean, it's just to do this in a manner where it's not some faculty from one department, some another, but the actual departments themselves may say, we really don't want our eggs in that basket, okay? To have that type of thorough conversation would have taken more, but if you are then saying, look at the resources that we have, how do we harness them into these emerging pathways, then I can see that.
On the research side, of course, faculty in academic units tied in with the organized research units.
yeah.
Can you speak to the incorporation between the academic home units and organized research units? Is there any, is it better if both types are together, or is that not necessary?
So my thinking would be, again, this is without, I'll say as a caveat, we haven't decided things, anything ahead of time. But our research centers are good examples of multidisciplinary. If a research center put in one for itself, that would seem reasonable to me because it is already interdisciplinary and already does reach out into units. So I'm thinking about Michael's, the way he worded his question and the way you worded yours. In a way, we're trying to encourage more ideas to come forward, and not because I'm going to respond to what the phrase you used. So they want to put their eggs in that basket. You spread your eggs anywhere you want, right? And you're going to have eggs in multiple baskets because if it's relevant, right? And so I feel similar to this. A research, we have, as you know, very good interdisciplinary research centers. And some of them I would suggest are probably at this signature level. And I don't think they need to reach out artificially to other areas if they already have faculty interacting from other units, even if they're not you know, even if part of their line isn't in the center, but they collaborate with the center, that's very, that's very reasonable.
Does the community value a role from partners that are outside the university? So, for example, East Marine Medical Center, in Maine.
Yeah, I think so, and I think what we tried to capture that is in that criteria around leveraging resources. It's the idea, you know, that you know, how can you reach within and outside the university to leverage resources to make it more successful, more likely to be successful. Okay.
I have two concept papers here ready to hand it to you. If we submit earlier,
That was new
then
family
we get
ahead
a
of the-
bonus
ahead of the
point.
deadline. I hate to disappoint you, Faye. I've already gotten one from somebody else. So you were first.
So we went through this exercise developing the concept papers and with multiple units involved in marine sciences, aquaculture. Somehow we feel like we have written a background and introduction section for a proposal, right? So if you write a standard proposal, you have a background introduction, you have a hypothesis, you have an experimental design, a manager plan, and the budget, right? So this is how you come. So how do you envision this 12 pages full proposal is going to look like? And what specifically you're asking for this 12 pages proposal?
And that's a fair question. I'll start backwards and say I'm not looking for a budget or experimental design, right? But I think you hit it well. It is more of like the introduction and rationale for a grant proposal, because where this is not, you know, this is different from a grant proposal, is we're not giving out awards. And I'm not gonna, if you wrote one, you don't get X thousand dollars to do something. What you're arguing is that, again, in whatever you're proposing in marine sciences, that be considered for the University of Maine, again, this signature area. What that would mean is as we move forward and we're making decisions about budget and things, we would have agreed that marine science is an area that we want to continue to support and maybe to grow our support. Right? So what I envision really is really it's more along the lines of what Nancy had said. You would now have, did we say 12 pages? I probably should have said 10. But anyway, 12 pages to really provide the data. You know, so we ask for things like, if it's an educational area, about evidence that this program attracts top quality students. You know, you can probably address that somewhat, but with more space, you can contact Ted Coladarchi, he can give you specifics, and you can flesh it out further. So really, we're thinking of just more, I hate to say it, but a more detailed introduction and rationale section. And then again, that's where it's not like a grant proposal, because we're not looking to fund a specific thing. We're looking to have guidance as we think about sort of a whole series of micro decisions about. I think you were going to ask something, David. Right? Nancy.
Well, I really, maybe I have some key words emerging education. So when I see something like growth potential, Ted's not going to be able to help me with that. So, but I can still try to argue a case that groundwork is laid and then the potential for.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I'll take your thing about your concept paper. So you say the groundwork has been laid and that there's a lot of interest in this. In a full proposal, you might, we don't have the data, but nationally are there data? Are there data from the state of Maine about the demographics or whatever that would suggest that there is potential to attract people? So, yeah, he's looking beyond internal sources.
Can I just clarify one of the words that you used in that last answer on a signature program, emerging program, you would continue to support.
Yeah.
And before you said we won't cannibalize programs. So when you say continue to support.
No, let me be clear. I didn't say we won't catalyze programs. I was relaying what Pathway One said in their proposal, okay? And I would prefer not to use the word catalyze, but I know administrators speak, which is we have to make difficult decisions and make priorities and choose some areas over others. And you can reword that
Completing
way.
support is actually a real word, not just a teaching money, but also existing.
Yeah. I mean, the president is going to be sending out a message to the campus soon, and then he and Janet and I are going to go out on a walking tour to give talks about the budget situation, and I prefer not to get into details about it here. But we're facing challenging budget times next year and into the next couple of years. So we as a campus are making difficult decisions all the time about how to allocate resources. Sorry, yeah, Greg.
Just something the outcome, I guess, I'm trying to envision, when these areas are announced,
Yeah.
signature areas, emerging areas, is this something where you envision some kind of website where prospective students or outsiders can sort of view what our signature strengths are? Are they going to be linked to specific departments, or individual faculty might be listed with these signature areas, or how do you see that? Or is it going to be sort of generalized as a signature area, but everything underneath that might be kind of blurred?
Yeah. So part of my answer to that is that we want to get to the point of where we have these. And again, I've said this in other contexts, in meetings with the deans when they were asking me about something similar. The primary reason we're doing this is what I've said, that we will help us to guide in making decisions. But there are secondary benefits, and they're the things like you're talking about. How can we use this to better market the university and help people understand, what our strengths are? So some of what I would anticipate doing is then going to the experts in marketing and say, yeah, how is the best way to do this? And again, not being an expert in that, but I have my opinions. I would envision something like a website, or maybe even a brief publication that one version of it might be something we would use with our admissions officers, and another version might be something we would give to the development officers that very briefly summarize. These are things that University of Maine is strong in. We might highlight a faculty member, or we might have a diagram that says, look, we're strong in this area X, and see all the different areas that feed into X, right? And show that it's multiple units. So somewhat of it depends on what comes out, but I guess it's a long answer. But my answer is, yes, I do anticipate that this will play a role in marketing the university in the different ways that we do it. And the exact way that looks is going to depend upon the market we're after. Does that help the rest of it?
I'll throw one more if you don't mind. Foundational, at what point will they fit in?
So that's a good question. And again, I'm not as far along as I would like to be, but I can tell you sort of the thinking about that. So again, as I said at the outset, I think it was a really important component of this. And so what I'm looking to try to invent, and I welcome people's thoughts about how to do that, is a way for University of Maine to publicly really reaffirm our commitment to what our broad-based liberal education and what that involves. I do not anticipate a process analogous to this, because I see it as different. So, for example, I'll choose an example. We know we're excellent in art. Okay, let's choose it. Right? So we don't. Do I need a proposal from you to say we're excellent in art, and therefore we should be supported because we're excellent? And let's say we're weak, hypothetically, Michael, in art history. Right?
I won't take it personally, don't worry.
Totally hypothetical. It's the first thing that popped into my head. I don't want to have a proposal competition to say, show me how weak you are, so that we can then invest in you. Right? It's a different thing. We need to be solid in our foundational areas. So what I'm trying to do is look at a way of having some kind of public discourse about this, and then identify, well, how do we do that? So where we're starting at, we're looking at things like the LEAP report from AACU, the Liberal Education America's Promise, about what are ways of thinking about broad-based liberal education in the 21st century, and then mapping that back onto the University of Maine and saying, well, if we're going to do that, what are the areas we need to make sure we are continuing to support or supporting adequately? So, I know where I want to get, But I've learned enough in academic administration, you can't go there because everyone will not want to do that. So I'm trying to think of ways to really have some kind of public discussion about how do we reaffirm that. And I want it to be more meaningful than just, go broad-based liberal education. But how do we identify these are the areas? And just analogous to us saying, we've decided this is a signature area, and therefore when we make tough decisions about resource allocation, we're going to support this. We will also say we know that these are foundational, and we need to support those. And I would resist the idea that that ties very simply to departments. Right? You could say, well, every college should have an English department, physics department, chemistry, math, and that's true. But I'll take English as an example. English isn't the only place people will learn to write. Right? So we want people to learn how to write and communicate. And we want to make that, say that's a foundational area. That cuts across the campus. And how do we envision supporting that as we move forward? So it's a little different. I'm working on that one, and I'll have communication with campus about it.
Going back to the signature and emerging areas, it seems that the basic parameters for the signature area are relatively clear, but I wonder if you could speak a bit more about emerging areas and to what extent they already need to be established and have a track record, to what extent you're interested in innovative proposals that are suggesting how we can tie things together in a more novel way.
So I think where we're at right now is we're most interested in things that have somewhat of a track record. And then if we can provide maybe a little bit of additional support, organization can move us up to a new level. As much as I would like to be investing in things that are just sort of outside of the box thinking new, those tend to be higher risk, and UMaine is not in a situation where we have a lot of funds to put at risk. So I would respond to your question by saying I view that as being on a continuum, and it would be more toward there's some established groundwork on this already, part of the continuum. And again, we try to reflect that in the criteria that we use. We talked about slide. But anyway, we talked about potential for sustainability, and we talked about it in different areas. So what do we have already that helps us to think that as this emerges, we're going to have the resources to continue this? We're concerned about, or we should be concerned about as a campus, investing in something that's too focused on, one individual or one area that we're at risk of not being able to sustain.
Sustainability is not a criteria for emerging
ones. Let me look at that. I'll give you what I'm thinking of emerging educational areas. You're right. I guess what I was thinking then more was along the lines of demonstrates growth potential in rising prominence of attracting top-tier undergraduate and competitive graduate students. The idea that we can attract students here who would be doing well enough to keep us going. But you're right. I was thinking of the research here. Yeah.
So, some of these questions just brought something to my mind with regards to, say you identify whether it's signature or emerging, some cross-cutting research emphasis that many faculty from many different departments participate in. And the university chooses that, and they choose to, divert money to this emphasis. I'm part of a research center, so that's an established research center that gets money. So administratively, we know, you get money through your department, you get money through your research center. The money that goes into this new area, how is it administered? Who gets what? How do the funds get?
Yeah. So we're not going to create a new administrative branch of signature and emerging programs. is going to be through those normal processes. I mean, the way funds are distributed around the university is, it's an ugly process where people argue back and forth. That's what it is, and I don't anticipate changing that. But what I anticipate is the dean being able to say, pardon my language, God damn it, Jeff, we said this is a signature area, and I'm advocating for my unit to have support in this area. I envision, or Carol's not here, but Carol Kim is vice president for research, saying, look, we agreed that this would be one of our strong areas. We need to put support there. Now let's figure out where we're not going to get it, where we're going to get it from. So I don't envision our processes changing that dramatically. I envision this being a factor.
What about those areas, though, say, that, like, just in my field, that have participants from both liberal arts and sciences and engineering?
Yep.
So there's two deans now.
That's right, and that's good for you, and good for your head, because you have two people saying, no, we said that.
But how would one determine, say, the engineers getting, the college of engineering getting money?
Yeah.
So I guess that's the big.
But again, what I'm saying to you is there's nothing new there. We're doing that already all the time. We're already doing it with the interdisciplinary research centers. I mean, yours is a good example where, when I was dealing with liberal arts and sciences, I would be trying to push costs off to Dana, and he would probably push costs off to me, and we would be saying, we both agree this is a great idea, and you should pay for it. And that's kind of how it evolves. So I don't see this changing.
Has there been any discussion of how this will affect departmental structures? And by that I mean, suppose, and please, colleagues forgive me, those whose fields I'm about to tap into. Suppose we're going to put forward an emerging American studies program that will draw from English, it will draw from history, it will draw from several other areas. How will that reshape those departments, and how are those departments to deal with, okay, you're a pianist, you're out, those positions won't be refilled. In other words, the self-determination of departments versus these sort of cross-departmental drivers. Has there been much discussion on that?
No. So my honest answer is I don't know. But I think that's what makes a healthy institution. You ought to be grappling with these kinds of questions. And I think it would be wrong for someone like in a position like mine to be saying, either don't worry units, everyone will be okay, because that's not true. Or here's our process for dealing with that, and I can't anticipate what's coming. So I mean, I think that would likely develop. But again, I'd see that as a healthy thing for an institution to go through, to be periodically saying, are we organizing the best way that we should? And that happens because tensions evolve. And units that we're all happy to, or people that are all happy to be part of one unit then start collaborating elsewhere and saying, you know what, more of my time and effort and interests are here, and I'm not, being rewarded that way. Again, that's the sort of tension that moves organizations forward. And I don't think we should avoid that, and I also think it's premature to just say, well, here's how we're going to solve those challenges. David.
Yeah, so this is real narrow maybe, but on the top criteria in fifth place, could you say a little bit more maybe generally and specifically about what you mean about the existing and future resource base and the second sub?
So what we're thinking about is, part of this, that whole number one about demonstrates a strong effective place. In our discussions with when we were coming up with these criteria, the question was asked, why Maine? So we might have a very strong program in. Again, everyone here knows I'm a psychologist, so I'll choose psychology. I'm very proud of the psych department here at the University. I think it's very strong by a variety of standards. But I would be hard-pressed to argue that the psych department is a unique strength for the University of Maine. Maybe within the state of Maine, but within New England, there are 30 strong, good psychology departments. So I'd have a harder time if I just wanted to focus on the Department of Psychology to say it's a signature area of the university. So what we're thinking of then is, why Maine? How does it fit with the resources we have as a state, be they natural resources, or to go back to the example the question is, local resources, right? What are the things that are here that we are either already accessing or have the potential to access to to support and advance this kind of program. I'm repeating myself. Is that good? Yeah. So it's all, I'll ask myself a question because I rehearsed the answer, so I hate to no one ask me. So, I mean, I anticipate someone to say, well, what if you're not a signature emerging program? Does that mean you're going to be cut? And again, I probably should have let myself off the hook because it's a tough question to answer. The short answer is because, no, we're not going to be a university that only has our signature emerging areas. Right? Again, they're not distinctive areas if they're all we have. Right? So we have to be looking at, and that's where part of the conversation about foundational areas comes in. And then there are a whole variety of factors that weigh into how we make decisions. This goes back to what you were saying. Maybe there are areas that, well, I'll pick on my own former department for. So I just said all those things about the Department of Psychology, and probably, in my opinion, wouldn't meet the criteria for signature area. But does that mean we're going to cut it? Well, no, actually, economically, we'd be stupid to cut it. We have 500 majors in psychology. It's a relatively inexpensive major to deliver. And then on the national scene, we have, a doctoral program that I'll brag for a moment. Recently was identified as one of the top 10 in terms of best training experiences. So these are good things. They don't make us all, don't meet these criteria, but they're still strengths at the university. So I don't want people to walk away with the idea that, guys, if I don't apply for this, I just wrote my own, my department's death warrant. We're going to continue to have a lot of things that aren't signature and emerging. That's part of what makes up a university. Now, the harder part of the answer is I think what you were getting at, and I'm not using the word cannibalize, but the reality is we have to make difficult decisions about what we're going to be and what we're not going to continue to be. And that's been going on here for a long time, and it's continuing to go on. And my goal and my little opportunity here, however long I'm in this position, is for us to be able to do that in a more thoughtful and open way. To say, well, this is the way we're moving, and not so much we're going to stop doing this just because we had a bunch of people leave there. And but we're thinking more strategically and broadly about how we make these difficult decisions.
Jeff, I just wanted to put this on the table, that I've been arguing this for years here, that the University of Maine is one of about 350 universities that's tracked by the Center for Measuring University Performance, one of the top 100 in some ways, American public research universities. There are very specific criteria that are used to judge research prowess and signatureness. Is the committee prepared to accept those as the key indicators for
Yes.
research signature?
Yes, and so yes, my answer is yes. And let me expand upon it. No one asked this question. Those are pretty cryptic criteria, right? And that is also on purpose because we are a diverse university. We do a variety of things, and if we start to say, well, you have to define. How you are distinctive and innovative, and here's our definition of that. That definition will fit some areas and it won't fit other areas. So, yes, if you're putting forward a research area, and you can cite those kind of national standards, those are exactly the kind of things we would expect people to do to make a convincing argument. But again, we don't want to say ahead of time everyone has to do that because it's more applicable to some areas than it is to others.
So to summarize then, if there's a center of excellence here, you're not planning to dismantle the center of excellence because it is necessary to meet an existing resource demand.
Right. Let me invite, I think Ellie, you missed the advisory team meeting, but you're on the review team. I don't know if you have any comments from that perspective. Or while you're thinking about it, Jeff, as well, you were in the advisory room. Anything you think I've missed to capture the essence of the discussion?
I would only say that all members of that January 10 group participated in developing the criteria, the long process, and everybody had input, everybody had involvement.
Now, Ellie was on the advisory group. wasn't at the January 10th, but did send nice written input, which we appreciated and shared. Francois, you were there as well. Any other thoughts that you think I missed in terms of capturing how the...
No, I mean, I guess I would just stress that this is, it seems like this process remains a dynamic and flexible one, and so there's some things that aren't written in stone. So I think that's, to me, that's still a big part of what's happening.
Nellie, any thoughts from you?
The only comment I might add is about the process. Does, the question came up about units and determining what direction units want to go. And I think it's kind of healthy to have a process by which we can look across units and look at ways that, because sometimes ideas that might not, that emerge in portions of units, but then it crosses a wide breadth of colleges and universities. But if we stay within our own localities, they don't last the time. I think that this process allows us to start thinking about some of those ideas.
I don't see anyone else who's there. Did I miss anybody? I will. You may note the absence of deans at this meeting. It's not that they abandoned me, and it's not that they were. You saw they were all participants in the advisory groups, and they were also participants as reviewers. It just happened when I scheduled the second one that 4 of them were off at our meeting, and then vote on something specific that they couldn't reschedule. 2 of the 15.
Oh, search committee, that's right, the fifth one's on a search committee. Any other, please?
Any idea what the hit rate will be after proposal? Are we at a 10% NSF?
I don't know, because I really don't know. I mean, I can tell you informally, one day I met with the deans and, they're informal, they said, you're going to get a lot of proposals. Sure, that will love you. We'll publish it right later this week.
Anyone else? Okay, again, this is, Francois said, this is a flexible process. If you do have further thoughts, shoot me an email. I'll try my best to address them, and I'll post whatever I do on the website. And spread the word with your colleagues about anything you've heard here that you think might be helpful for them in addressing the questions. No, then thanks a lot for coming, and I appreciate your flexibility.